CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Naweed Jabarkil. Our top stories. A desperate search for survivors in Western Europe, where floods have killed at least 160 people.
A day of mourning is declared here in Belgium as the Prime Minister describes the floods as the most catastrophic ever. I'll bring you the latest from Liège.
COVID at the Olympics. The first case is reported at the athletes' village, along with more than a dozen new infections linked to the Games. And starstruck in Shanghai, the world's biggest planetarium gets ready to open to the public. At least 160 people have been killed in catastrophic floods across Germany and Belgium. Emergency teams fear the figure will rise, with hundreds of people still missing. Rescuers are now desperately searching for survivors following the worst natural disaster to hit Western Europe in half a century. Michael Voss reports.
The floodwaters are starting to recede across much of the worst affected regions of Western Europe, allowing residents to return and assess the damage, with clean-up operations now underway. Germany has suffered the highest death toll, and hundreds of people remain unaccounted for after devastating flash floods destroyed homes, cars, roads and bridges.
You don't expect people to die in a flood in Germany. You expect it maybe in poor countries, but you don't expect it here. But it was all too fast, too quick.
Emergency services, aided by the military, continue their desperate search for survivors, with fears that more bodies may be found in the cars and trucks that were swept away in the flash floods. Emergency relief supplies and other donations are starting to arrive, with hundreds of volunteers working round the clock in the town of Neuerberg to get help to those most in need.
If you wanted to see something positive about this whole catastrophe, then it's this wave of readiness to help. I think that's great.
Search efforts are also continuing in Belgium, where the death toll continues to rise. King Philippe and Queen Mathilde visited Pepinster, near Liège, the country's worst affected region. The royal couple offered comfort to one local resident who was visibly upset at the damage done to the cafe she owned. Some of the worst flooding is now centred on the Netherlands, where thousands of people were forced to leave their homes on Friday as rising waters burst a dike and swollen rivers flooded low-lying towns. Switzerland is the latest country to be hit by these exceptional rainstorms, with serious flooding reported as several lakes and rivers started to overflow. As clean-up operations get underway, there are questions over the lack of advance warnings. The debate is also growing over the need for more urgent action on climate change to prevent such catastrophes from becoming more common. Michael Voss, CGTN.
Well, the Belgian government has declared Tuesday a national day of mourning. Our correspondent Lucy Hoff joins us now from Liège. Lucy, just tell us what's the latest where you are at the moment.
Well, at the moment there is a desperate search for survivors. There are around 20 people missing from this region alone, the region around the city of Liège, which was the worst affected region of Belgium. Those individuals are believed to have been swept up in the flash floods that hit after that torrential rainfall on Wednesday. The military has been drafted in. There is also help from Italy and the Netherlands for the rescue efforts here, which are taking place under enormously difficult circumstances, with continued mass power outages in this region. Here in this town there is a clear-up operation, people trying to salvage what they can from their damaged homes, their damaged businesses. People here saying that they have lost everything in the space of just 2 days. There is a rescue centre that we were at a little bit earlier, where people are able to access basic food and water supplies, baby clothes, nappies, to get them through the next few days. But the damage to this community is immense. In the neighbouring village, 6 people killed in the flash floods, a sense that this community will be in mourning for weeks and months to come.
And as you say, the damage still being assessed. What's been the political response so far?
Well, there's been a huge political response. Today we've had a visit from the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, as well as the President of the European Commission, the EU's executive, who has come to the town of Pepinster, that town where 6 people tragically lost their lives. She has said that the European Union stands with this community, pledging support moving forward as this community tries to rebuild. The German government has been very strong on this, describing this as a catastrophe, saying that they were really in shock at what had happened and talking about the urgent need to address the threat from climate change, given what we were hearing there from those residents of Germany who say they have seen some flooding in Europe, but nothing of this scale, nothing with this big of a loss of life. The Belgian Prime Minister as well has declared that Tuesday will be a day of national mourning.
And just briefly, loosely, the threat from these rising waters isn't over yet. As you say, the search for survivors continuing. What do ordinary people, local people there, think about the way this has been handled and whether more could have been done to prevent it?
I think there is mounting anger about how this has been handled, given that we know extreme weather warnings were issued early last week. But evacuation notices came too late, not giving people ample time to clear the areas before those flash floods hit. And there is a sense that had those systems been working properly, then such a heavy death toll could have been prevented. So there will be a lot of assessments about how those systems can be improved if indeed there is this continued threat. The threat, as you say, still not over yet. The River Meuse, which runs close to where we are now and runs towards the border of the Netherlands, we're told there is one dike there that is at risk of bursting. The community around that dike on high alert. There have been evacuation notices issued. People warned not to travel into the area, but a sense that this could not be over yet.
OK, Lucy Hoff, live for us in Liège. Thank you very much. Staying in Belgium, 10 children and 6 mothers who were held in a jihadist prison camp in Syria have returned home. It's the biggest repatriation of suspected Islamic State members since the caliphate fell in 2019. The women are expected to be arrested and charged by anti-terror authorities and their children taken into care. 3 other mothers and 7 children reportedly rejected the offer to be flown back to Belgium. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has been sworn in for a 4th 7-year term after claiming more than 95% of the votes cast in government-held areas. The May elections were described by his opponents and the West as illegitimate. More than 600 people attended the swearing-in ceremony, including clergymen, members of parliament and army officers. Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has arrived in Damascus for talks with senior Syrian officials. Wang has just completed a tour of 5 Central Asian countries, including Afghanistan, which he visited ahead of the final withdrawal of US troops. Talks there focused on regional security and cooperation. South Africa's president has admitted authorities were ill-prepared for this week's attempted insurrection. More than 200 people were killed and hundreds of shopping centres and businesses were looted and destroyed. Order has since been restored and residents have been cleaning up while aid groups hand out food. The worst violence in post-apartheid South Africa erupted after the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma. Pilgrims have arrived in Mecca to perform the Tawaf, which involves walking around the Kaaba 7 times. For a second year, the annual Hajj pilgrimage has been restricted to Saudi Arabian citizens and residents and limited to 60,000 people. Before the pandemic, around 2.5 million pilgrims visited Islam's holiest sites every year. China's carbon trading market has finally gone online, covering 4 billion tons of CO2 emissions. It's effectively the world's largest market of its kind, overtaking the EU. Europe launched the world's first emissions trading system in 2005, mainly targeting power generation and manufacturing. To accelerate the bloc's push towards climate neutrality, Brussels has now proposed extending the scheme to include more industries, as Tony Waterman reports.
Europe was really on the cutting edge of carbon pricing 16 years ago when it introduced the world's first emissions trading system, putting this cap on emissions and essentially forcing companies to pay to pollute. The program right now mainly covers the energy and manufacturing sectors, which are traditionally some of the dirtiest industries out there. But by limiting greenhouse gas emissions, this has driven up the cost of doing business for some of these firms. So they have very quickly learned to adapt. For example, the French energy giant Engie, it has committed to ending coal-fired power generation and to increase the overall share of renewable energy. Chemicals giant INEOS, in just the past week, has announced a new carbon capture and storage initiative to suck these harmful planet-warming emissions out of its production process. The company says that it could sequester up to 100 million tons of CO2 by 2027. The project, though, is still very much in the early stages, but it could be tested at the company's petrochemicals plant and oil refinery in Scotland, which is part of a joint venture with PetroChina. These adaptations, while they are expensive for these companies, are paying dividends. Brussels says that emissions are down nearly 43% since the ETS launched, and it now wants to extend the scheme to other sectors as Europe strives to be climate neutral by 2050.
We know that carbon pricing works. The principle is simple. Emission of CO2 must have a price on CO2 that incentivizes consumer, producers and innovators to choose the clean technologies, to go towards the clean and sustainable products.
In the coming years, the maritime industry, so shipping, cruise ships, it will be added to the mix, and the free allowance that the aviation sector has been enjoying will be phased out. A separate carbon market is also going to be created to cover road transport and home heating fuels. This could drive up costs for consumers, and it is already hitting stiff opposition. But if Europe is to meet its ambitious climate targets, the path to getting there will have to be equally, if not more, aggressive. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Many Chinese firms, including those working in the clean energy sector, are joining China's new trading market to help the country achieve its goal of carbon neutrality. CGTN's Gao Ang visited an offshore wind farm to find out more.
Off the coast of East China's Jiangsu province is the country's first offshore wind power project with foreign investment.
The Dongtai wind farm is more than 40 kilometers from here. When it was built in 2019, it was China's farthest offshore wind power project. It was also one of the most difficult ones to build due to water conditions and frequent typhoons. But the operators say the farther from land, the better the wind resources are.
The project is jointly developed by China Energy and French energy giant EDF Group, one of the largest producers of low-carbon energy worldwide.
The project is expected to generate 1.4 billion kilowatt hours of electricity each year. According to estimations, that means we can avoid burning about 420,000 tons of standard coal and cut about 930,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions.
As the offshore wind farm generates electricity, these devices help connect it to the electricity grid, powering millions of households.
And as Liu pointed out, the motivation behind such efforts is China's goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2060.
I believe carbon neutrality by 2060 is an important ambition, but it's really worth having it, and I think it's possible. It's possible through bold action. On the one side, developing more electricity for the Chinese economy, but on the other side, China will need lower carbon electricity, which means gradually get rid of coal and replace existing coal with low carbon technologies.
Experts and industry professionals say wind power still faces challenges, including high costs and unstable weather conditions. But it's worth watching how clean energy can help China achieve the goal of carbon neutrality. Gang, CGTN Jiangsu Province.
Still ahead here on The World Today. An ancient form of self-defense becomes the newest sport at the Olympic Games.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens.
4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top story. A desperate search for survivors in Western Europe, where floods have killed at least 160 people. The UK's Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has tested positive for COVID-19, saying he's got mild symptoms. It comes as the UK reports nearly 55,000 new COVID cases. That's the highest daily total since mid-January.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to update you all that I've tested positive for COVID. I was feeling a bit groggy last night, so I took a lateral flow test this morning and it's come out positive. So I'm now self-isolating at home with my family until I get the results of a PCR test. I'm grateful that I've had 2 jabs of the vaccine, and so far my symptoms are very mild.
It comes as England is taking its final step out of lockdown on Monday, lifting rules on social distancing and masks. Nightclubs will be among the businesses set to reopen, as Nicole Johnston reports.
From London to Manchester, Glasgow to Liverpool, the UK was renowned for nightclubs and world-class DJs. Until it all stopped with the virus, and clubbing and music festivals were banned.
Well, we've lost about 40% of clubs in particular. We've lost about £80 billion in revenue over the course of the pandemic, and over 700,000 jobs. So from our perspective, the 19th is the first opportunity that we're going to be able to rebuild.
Before the pandemic, up to 40,000 people a week visited London's Hippodrome Casino. With 7 floors of bars, casinos and a theatre, it's the West End's largest entertainment centre.
The West End needs time. It's a complex ecosystem, and the removal of these mandatory restrictions is a great welcome start. And it will herald the change where people will start going back to offices, the theatres will be able to go back to full capacity, they will open up, the restaurants will open up around them, and the whole ecosystem starts building up. We think it'll probably take about 2 months before we get back to normal.
Before the pandemic, London City Council wanted the city to be open 24 hours a day. And nightclubs and casinos were a key to that. On Monday, they'll be back. No plastic screens, masks or social distancing. But the government says it's encouraging clubs to restrict entry to people with so-called COVID passports.
As a matter of social responsibility, we're urging nightclubs and other venues with large crowds to make use of the NHS COVID pass, which shows proof of vaccination, a recent negative test, or natural immunity as a means of entry.
But the nighttime industry doesn't support the idea of COVID passports, arguing it's too intrusive.
Clearly there are lots of issues with imposing COVID guidelines on all of the discriminatory fronts, with the people who can't get vaccinated because they're too young, won't get vaccinated because they have a health reason, and so we're not going to go into that whole minefield. We will do whatever we're told to do. It's not something we would welcome, because it's just another level of bureaucracy on the front door.
The government regards clubs as high-risk settings for disease transmission. But that's a risk many young people are willing to take. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
France is tightening its rules for unvaccinated travellers. From Sunday, people who are not fully vaccinated coming from some European countries will need to show a negative COVID-19 test taken less than 24 hours beforehand. It comes as thousands have been marching in Paris against plans to require a COVID-19 health certificate to enter places such as bars, restaurants and theatres. A person has tested positive for COVID-19 at the Tokyo Olympics Athletes Village, adding to concerns about infections at the Games, which begin next week. Phoebe Amoroso has the latest.
Well, that individual has been moved to a hotel and is being isolated. The organisers are very keen to protect the privacy. They've not announced the country that that person is from. But this news also comes as there have been 45 cases associated with Olympics officials, staff and athletes since July the 1st. That climbed just by an extra 15 in the past 24 hours. However, we heard some words that were aimed at reassuring the Japanese public today from IOC President Thomas Bach. He says that since July the 1st, 15,000 athletes and officials have come into Japan, and the relatively low numbers show that these measures are going ahead. They are being successful in screening, and that there is zero risk to the Japanese public. In particular, he points to the residents of the Olympic Village, over 85% will be vaccinated. However, these numbers do not include people who work in the restaurants or cleaners, so that remains one concern. Officials are also tackling the issue of close contacts. This is, for example, if a team of athletes arrive in Japan on a flight where one member on that flight is confirmed to be positive, they have to isolate. So this is why the South African Rugby Sevens are now in a hotel facility in Tokyo as opposed to their training camp in Kagoshima. But the officials are looking to revise these rules so that athletes can compete if they take a PCR test and within 6 hours before their competition they test negative. The reason for this is that the close contact cases seem to be on the rise, and this could jeopardize athletes' chance to compete. However, they said they will also be considering contact sports as to whether consent of other athletes would be necessary in that situation.
Phoebe Amoroso reporting from Tokyo. Well, the International Olympic Committee has backed New Zealand's selection of a transgender weightlifter for the Tokyo Games. Laurel Hubbard had competed in men's weightlifting competitions before transitioning 8 years ago. The IOC says under current rules, which will be reviewed in the future, she is allowed to compete. Karate will make its full Olympic debut at Tokyo 2020. One of the favourites to win a gold medal comes from Spain. CGTN's Rahul Pathak caught up with him.
An ancient discipline, and now a brand new Olympic event. Karate, not to be confused with Kung Fu, takes a bow at Tokyo 2020 as a full Olympic sport. Fitting given that karate is thought to have originated in host nation Japan nearly 700 years ago. One of the favourites for gold isn't Japanese though, he's Spanish.
This is the most important thing that has happened to our sport in a long, long time. In my case, before becoming an Olympic athlete, I had to work, study and compete for European and World Championships. And now I'm a full-time karate athlete.
Two-time world silver medalist Damian Quintero is one of the top names competing in Tokyo. The 37-year-old from Torremolinos is already a two-time individual European champion, and he's part of a Spanish squad that's #1 both in Olympic and world rankings.
It's because we work so hard. There are a lot of amazing people and amazing trainers guiding us. From the base, not only at an Olympic level, but since we are kids, we have amazing masters everywhere around Spain, and they know how to get the most out of every boy and girl, so they become great professionals.
Karate enjoy a resurgence in recent years, although it still has some way to go to match the peaks it enjoyed during the 1970s.
Karate's popularity has increased thanks also to the media, which has also helped us financially, as we have found sponsors and received help from public institutions like the Olympic Committee and the Superior Council for Sports in Spain.
Now, the euphoria surrounding karate's long overdue inclusion at the Olympic Games has been tempered by the fact that it won't be included at the Paris Games in 2024. But Damian says his focus is on Tokyo and giving his sport the best possible exposure, not just here in Spain, but around the world. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
It took 5 years to build, and the Shanghai Astronomy Museum is finally opening its doors. The general public will be allowed into the largest museum of its kind anywhere in the world on Sunday. CGTN's Wu Lei got in early for a sneak peek.
How big is our solar system? Are we alone in the universe? These are just some of the questions I've asked myself since childhood. Today I come to this world's largest astronomy museum to try and find out some answers. This is the first zone of the exhibition named Homeland, which shows all the planets in our solar system. Look at the Earth and Moon. The size of them is close to their real proportions. Here are some 70 meteorites, including some from the Moon and Mars. There is a belt region around each star called the habitable zone, where the temperature is moderate. This is where our Earth is located. Scientists say being in the habitable zone doesn't necessarily mean a world has the right conditions to support life. They are still researching the possibility of life on other planets. Here's a Yutu-2 rover and Chang'e 5 lunar probe show the highlights of China's lunar space programs, but let me try these virtual reality goggles. After wearing this goggle, I'm now roaming on the moon. I can jump to move forward. Okay. This is a really exciting experience. I think visitors will love it. This is a precise model of China's Tianhe core module. 3 technonauts are now working on the Tianhe core module in space. But visitors can come here and take a closer look at how technonauts eat, sleep, grow plants, and do all kinds of experiments in space. From this Sunday on, 6,000 visitors will be allowed in here each day. But what exactly is a parallel universe, and how would things look beyond our own universe? This tour has left me with even more questions. But one thing for certain, exhibition like this helps us learn more about the past, present, and future. Because after all, exploring the unknown is part of human nature. Wu Lei, CGTN, Shanghai Astronomy Museum.
That's it for The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're available on apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well, of course, at cgtn.com and on the CGTN app. Coming up next on CGTN, it's the agenda from all the team here in London. Goodbye.